When I watched Time's Arrow, I always felt a really strong connection to it. Of course, the episode itself is just objectively good, but I think it's how it handles womanhood by interweaving it with the concept of generational trauma that really cements its place as one of the best things I've ever watched. So let's take a trip down the arrow of time and explore how the episode's portrayal of womanhood masterfully creates an explanation of how we got here.
Can you taste the ice cream, Mom?
Oh, BoJack, it's so delicious.
And how growing up in abuse can sometimes perpetuate that abuse to the next generation. Part 1. Physical appearance in womanhood. Beatrice's childhood largely took place before the Second World War, as observed in the old Sugarman place. During this time, women were assumed to be the caretakers in charge of emotional regulation and child-rearing, but should simultaneously maintain appearances. Although Bee's family appears idyllic and happy, we already see some pretty oppressive views about weight creeping in, albeit treated mostly as a gag, parodying the very restrictive nature of beauty standards at the time. For example, Beatrice isn't allowed to eat ice cream, and when she tries, her mother tells her,
Beatrice, you know iced cream is for boys. You can sprinkle some sugar on a lemon. That's a good healthy girl snack.
The casual enforcing of weight management is not uncommon. Maintaining a physical appearance aligning with cultural beauty standards is often taught as a responsibility of women, and although it may not be as overt as presented here, weight is something inescapable, and this expectation of perfection is reinforced by her parents to the degree that she medicates herself for it. Note how this advice comes partially from her mother and that her bullies are other girls. Do you think someone who grew up forcing to eat less and subsequently become miserable would never want to enforce that onto her child? But beauty standards are in some part perpetuated by the very gender that is suffering from them. This is why Beatrice drugging Hollyhock feels so believable. Without these hints in the old Sugarman place, her actions kind of appear outlandish. Having it further explained in Time's Arrow solidifies how much weight and appearance affected Bee's life. Beatrice grew up subconsciously and consciously attached to her physical appearance as an indicator of status and how much respect she should receive from others. Some examples include, she's bullied by schoolmates for being overweight as a child. Note, Bee mentions father says I'm just growing, subtly hinting this to be an issue already discussed in her home. When he's talking about the bullying after she gets scarlet fever, her father attributes responsibility not to the bullies, but the weight itself.
Doctor says your throat is nearly swollen shut, so perhaps you'll finally lose some of that weight that's given you such troubles. Won't that be nice?
Another example is when her father says reading is useless because it...
Reading does nothing for young women but build their brains, taking valuable resources away from their breasts and hips.
A more subtle example also is when Beatrice arrives on Butterscotch's doorstep and mentions that she looks terrible, to which he responds,
It's a verifiable fact. You look more beautiful than ever.
This connection to weight leads to some pretty horrible loathing towards BoJack, claiming that having him made her quote-unquote physically unappealing, which is a lie. Bea remained conventionally thin after having BoJack, as we see in these flashbacks. She just gained weight as she got older, which is normal. There's something to be said about how Bea began to challenge many of the classist and sexist ideas her father presents, but still asks for a pretty pill when dressing up. The importance of physical appearance remains even if the other things are challenged. That's how normalized that expectation was. It's also interesting to note that this physical appearance is what Butterscotch comments on in both his advances towards Henrietta and Bea. Butterscotch's subtle condescension and sexist ideals is something Bea interprets as a challenge. Since she's already going against her father in this manner, she's charmed by his advances because of how he perceives her as attractive. Ultimately, it was her father's words, mother's absence, and childhood trauma that partially led to this union with Butterscotch, a man she really didn't know much at all, showing how instrumental abuse is in affecting the quality of relationships you form. Weight shadows overshadowed and consumed every aspect of Beatrice's life because she was a woman growing up in a very restrictive time, surrounded by individuals who would only enforce those ideals onto her. Physical appearance being so intertwined with her identity fueled her abuse towards BoJack, consequently demonstrating how this divine shit show of circumstances extended beyond just Bea, which is just so well written and so conscious of both what abuse does and how trauma can differ based on a person's gender. Part 2. Parenthood. Another really important thing explored within this episode is Beatrice's idea of parenthood, both what is forced upon her and how she views it herself. To preface, a woman's worth was often associated with her ability to bear children and become a caring mother. As previously mentioned, women were primarily expected to have children and take care of the home while the men went to work. Throughout time's arrow, this expectation is explored and reinforced through Beatrice's behaviors, as well as how her unique situation molds a very distorted image of parenthood. First, let's talk about her mother, Honey Sugarman. Before her lobotomy, Honey was a very sweet mother, but she kind of did neglect Bea in favor of her eldest son, Crackerjack. She's not intentionally doing so, at least I don't think so. It's just that there's a certain divide between them. Of course, this could be explained by the fact that we see the family on the day Crackerjack is leaving for World War II. I think it's worth noting how Honey Sugarman acts as a strong maternal figure in Bea's life, teaching her the do's and don'ts of being a socially acceptable girl. Enforcing dietary restrictions is one way, but Honey is also really clever, something which she sees endears her to her father, and is a quality Bea herself fosters later on, albeit in a much more cynical way. Unfortunately, Joseph Sugarman's emotional unavailability towards Honey's grief, as well as her desperate desire to suppress it, results in her getting lobotomized. Side note, lobotomies were often used on women, a sad but interesting tidbit on history. There's also a connection to the stereotype of women being more emotional than men, which is something I'll touch on later. Getting back to parenthood. This severing from her prefrontal cortex and the subsequent loss of personality leads Honey to say this:
Love does things to a person, terrible things. Beatrice, promise me you'll never love anyone as much as I loved Crackerjack.
I promise. I won't.
The reason Honey's line holds so much significance is because that was what the only maternal figure Bea encountered throughout her life, or at least what we've seen of it, imparted on her. And Honey was completely altered by the grief over losing her son. To young Beatrice, it would seem like having a tender heart towards her son was her downfall. I think this image of her mother definitely contributed to her equating BoJack as someone that has to be worth something, that he has to somehow earn her love. I mean, that's what the only parental figure in her life, Joseph Sugarman, reinforced onto her. But that's wrong. Children do not exist to be worth something to their parents. The responsibility of bearing a child falls on the parents, and that continues to be their responsibility until the child comes of age. Legally, I mean. Parents who enforce this idea onto their children that they have to be worth something to justify their existence are not only damaging the child later down the line, but also making that child believe that they need to prove something not only to their parents, but to everyone they meet. I mean, BoJack struggles with this exact problem throughout the series, feeling the need to amount to something, to be worth something in order to be loved. In Bea's eyes, Honey's sadness and grief was her undoing. Her father's demeaning of womanly emotions certainly didn't help either, and we'll get to her father, don't you worry. It's also Honey's words that, in my opinion, taints all of Bea's relationships, especially that of her relationship with BoJack. Looking at Beatrice in childhood, we see that she did actually want to be a mother, or at least enjoyed the aspect of being a mother. And in Stupid Piece of Shit, we see this again. BoJack even thinks why she's so passionate about loving this doll when she abused him for his entire childhood. It's also important to address how much Bea's dementia affects her. I mean, Time's Arrow is quite literally visualizing the processes Bea is going through while she's living with BoJack. It's very likely that the behavior Bea is exhibiting here is so childlike because she's time shifting. As described by the Alzheimer's Society, time shifting is when a person's experience is that they are living at an earlier time in their life. They may become disoriented and confused about time and place. So the Beatrice we see cradling the doll is probably a version of herself that existed. It adds another layer to the title of the episode. Time's arrow neither stands still or reverses is a phrase often quoted by her father that she repeats. I think it's just a wonderful piece of writing for this to be the phrase that titles the episode, since Time's arrow does both here. Returning to the main topic. Bea learned from her mother that parenthood or motherhood is something that can be your undoing, something that hollows you out if you let yourself love. So it isn't any surprise that she's so cold and uncaring towards BoJack. Not to dismiss her own agency, of course. Beatrice is 100% responsible for her actions, but just as the episode aims to do, I'm merely painting a picture of why I think she behaved that way. After her mother's lobotomy, the only parental figure she has is her father, who rigorously enforces sexist ideologies onto her. He tries to force Beatrice into marriage against her will and demeans her education. To pull up a legitimate source, the Canadian Women's Association notes down several behaviors adhering to emotional abuse Joseph displays in accordance with his sexism, specifically gaslighting and manipulation, which is as follows: defining and trying to exert how they think you should feel, dismissing of your feelings as crazy, dramatic, overreacting, or emotional, refusing to take responsibility for their actions or how they made you feel. They may try to frame everything, including your pain, as your fault, and humiliation and derision, which includes belittling your interests. He also instills a need to perform. We can see his obsession with appearances with how he handles Honey's grief after she crashes the car, and how he forces Bea to have a debutante ball despite her unwillingness to. He gets mad at Bea for leaving said ball because of how it makes him look. These are all performative acts he wants her to do because it fits in with the societal expectations of women and makes him and his family look good. No wonder it was Bea who spoke one of the most prominent themes in the show, "Don't Stop Dancing." What's interesting is that Bea in this stage of her life acts against her father and views him as a disgrace. But as the episode progresses, we are shown the extent to which her memories distort and how she begins to view him as a man who quote-unquote knew what marriage meant. It's so horrible to think that this is what she thinks of the husband who abandoned his wife when she was grieving their son and then agreed to lobotomize her. Not to mention how he is responsible for the action that certifiably sent Bea on this path of misery. I'm of course talking about the burning of the baby doll. This event has always been a really cool point of interest for me because it's not inherently horrible. Joseph is technically doing a good act by burning the doll, since she had scarlet fever and has infected everything, but it's his handling of the situation that is abusive. Instead of talking to her about it and gently calming her down after she starts crying, he instead enforces emotional repression by saying crying is stupid, and then threatening to lobotomize her. Keep in mind, Bea is a child here. Bea is then made to feel like her feelings are what is wrong, not the action, and loses another thing she deeply loved without any real explanation. This event is why Beatrice refuses to get rid of BoJack even when she barely knows butterscotch. Her father's treatment of her quote-unquote womanly emotions can also be why Beatrice says this.
Don't you dare cry. Don't you ever cry. You wanted this.
Joseph's insistence on controlling her emotions is purely out of cowardice. He's just saying this so she's easier to handle. And isn't that why Bea imparts this onto BoJack? Another line that really ties into this distorted image of parenthood and motherhood is this scene in which Joseph chastises Honey, stating,
Now listen here. It's a mother's duty to keep her children alive, and you are continually failing. How could you not have known she has scarlet fever? Say something, damn it! What has become of you?
This line simultaneously informs Beatrice of her role as a woman to nurture, but is also a misrepresentation of motherhood and parenthood to be. Being a parent is so much more than just keeping your child alive. Of course, that's a pretty big part of it, but frankly, that's the bare minimum. It's easy to see how this might have influenced Bee's idea of parenthood, making her think that as long as BoJack was alive, she could do whatever she wanted with him. But you can't be a good parent without loving your child. Children are smarter than you think. They'll know when there's no love present behind your actions. BoJack knew this from the start, even as a child. That's how he got this idea that he has to earn it, because it wasn't a given in his childhood. Again, the aforementioned attribution of worth to a child. At the same time, scenes like
The bikini model? Whoa, Ethan. This man is our guest.
show that there was definitely some love there, even some pride. I mean, why did she give BoJack her father's painting? Why did she even show up to the horsing around performance? But Honey's words to Bee may have influenced her to think it would only destroy her to show affection. And because of Joseph's ideas about womanly emotions, she may have reflexively toughened up to never let that side of her show. Joseph Sugarman's abuse, in combination with Honey's line and outcome, both tainted the idea of parenthood, emphasizing it as a burden on her free life, contributing to her abuse towards BoJack. But this view on motherhood didn't just damage BoJack. Unresolved trauma creates toxic behaviors that can hurt everyone around someone. That's right, now it's time to talk about Henrietta. Parenthood Point 1. Henrietta. Henrietta. What can I say about what happened to this poor girl? She wasn't taken in with Butterscotch's musings about his dead mother, as Bee was, and ends up pregnant. Yes, what she did was wrong, but let's not discount the fact that an older man in a position of power made the offer. Anyways, Beatrice, haunted by her decision to keep BoJack and her trauma making her think that that decision is what ruined her life, urges Henrietta to give the baby for adoption against her wishes. At first, we believe this to be a truly good act, the only really good act Bee has done. Her framing of the situation as that man poisoning her life made me think her insistence towards Henrietta was genuine, and I do think a part of it was. But in a masterfully edited segment, we finally get the memory of the burning baby doll. In it, we see how Bee repeats the same abuse that was done to her onto another, in the exact same way. Bee can be argued to be doing a good thing just like Joseph, but again, it's the way she handles it that is abusive. Instead of letting Henrietta hold Hollyhock, she imparts the idea that
I need to hold her.
This is for your own good.
which is exactly what her father said. She enforces this idea onto Henrietta that the baby itself is a burden, not thinking about Henrietta's feelings, just about justifying her own ideas about parenthood. Joseph's treatment of the situation minimized Bee's feelings as childish and naive, implying that she should be grateful for what her father is deciding for her. Bee, in turn, does the same thing to Henrietta, truly becoming the monster she once detested. Part 3. Marching Forward. When Beatrice finally comes to the present, it's right after experiencing the worst of her life. And it's here, right as BoJack is about to leave, does she recognize him. I've always wondered, why here? Why now? But I don't think that matters as much as what BoJack decides to do when she's come to consciousness.
I don't understand. Where am I?
You're in Michigan.
Michigan?
Yeah, at the lake house.
I am?
And it's a warm summer night, and the fireflies are dancing in the sky, and your whole family is here, and they're telling you that everything is going to be all right.
Yes, that's right. What else?
The crickets are chirping, and the lake is still, and the night is full of stars.
I can see it. It's so clear. What are we doing here, BoJack?
We're sitting on the back porch, and we're listening to your brother play the piano, and we're eating ice cream. Vanilla ice cream.
Yes, that's right. Oh, it's all so marvelous.
Can you taste the ice cream, Mom?
Throughout the season, BoJack has been saying that he can't wait for his mom to come back so he can tell her what an awful parent she was and really lay into her. But in this moment, BoJack chooses to entertain her fantasy. Why? Maybe it's because he knew she was vulnerable. Maybe the part of him that wanted to be loved by this woman won out. The masterpiece of an episode that is Free Churro. The line that really destroyed me was this one.
You know the shittiest thing about all of this? Is when that stranger behind the counter gave me that free churro, that small act of kindness showed more compassion than my mother gave me her entire goddamn life. Like, how hard is it to do something nice for a person? This woman at the Jack in the Box didn't even know me. I'm your son. All I had was you.
BoJack desperately wanted a relationship with his mother. He wanted to be loved by his father too, but he yearned for Beatrice's love more than anything else. It was her he curled up with after drinking, her who instilled a need to perform, and her who tore him down time and time again. Beatrice was a terrible person, an abusive woman who was a monster to her son and those unwittingly dragged into their miserable, perpetually drowning family. But this episode's ability to construct and introduce the nuances of how someone like that can exist help elevate her from just a caricature into a real woman who might and probably does exist. Her experiences are a testament to how much societal conditioning, childhood trauma, and abuse can warp an individual into what they might have feared as a victim. And none of this would have been possible if not for the exploration of Beatrice's identity as a woman, and how the emphasis of that identity, social roles in her life by those who were supposed to nurture her, ruined her. I mean, that's what breaks the illusion, this gendered prohibition of eating ice cream. Well played, showrunners. Well played. Conclusion. I hope this video was able to shed some light on a really cool aspect of Time Zero from a different perspective. I feel like BoJack Horseman's creators really nailed how generational trauma manifests and how much gender can play a part. If you all have any thoughts about this, I would love to see people discussing both Beatrice's and BoJack's trauma in the comments below. Like I mentioned in my community post, I love when the comment section is like an ecosystem, building off of each other to discuss things further. And if you want to give an analysis of BoJack's trauma from a male perspective, that's great too. I would love to hear more about all types of views from all types of perspectives. Also, if you disagreed with anything I said or felt like I forgot to cover something, please feel free to explain it civilly below. Well, that's it. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.